In the coastal villages of Crete and Sardinia, researchers studying populations of adults in their late 70s and 80s kept running into the same puzzle. These men and women were doing things that most Western doctors would consider remarkable for their age: gardening on steep hillside plots, kneeling at church, walking for miles on uneven ground. And they were doing it without the chronic joint stiffness and morning immobility that has become practically expected in the United States, the UK, and Canada by the time someone reaches their mid-60s. What separated these populations from their Western counterparts wasn't genetics. The same ancestral groups who emigrated to North America 2 or 3 generations ago don't share the same joint outcomes. It wasn't a prescription drug. It wasn't an expensive supplement regimen. It was 3 foods: common, inexpensive, widely available foods that they had been eating as daily staples for most of their lives. And when scientists began examining exactly what those foods do inside aging joint tissue, at the molecular level, the findings were not what most people expect. Today, the countdown covers all 3 of those foods: what they are, how much to eat, when to eat them, and why the biological mechanisms involved may do more for cartilage health and joint flexibility than most of what's currently being marketed to seniors in the supplement aisle. The countdown goes from 3 to 1. Number 1 will be the surprise. It's a food that most adults in Western countries eat perhaps once or twice a year, usually around the holidays. Mediterranean seniors eat it multiple times every week. And a growing body of research on what it does to specific enzymes inside joint cartilage has made it one of the most discussed foods in nutritional rheumatology in the past several years. Stay all the way through. Number 1 is worth it. Before the countdown starts, do us a quick favor. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching from right now and what time of day it is there. This channel reaches people from every corner of the globe, and it genuinely matters to us to know who's on the other side of the screen. Let us know below. Food number 3, extra virgin olive oil. Number 3, extra virgin olive oil. And almost certainly not the kind you're currently using. If you already cook with olive oil, and this section is especially for you, because there's a meaningful chance the bottle in your kitchen right now contains very little of the compound that makes this food relevant to joint health. And that distinction is not a matter of brand preference, it's a matter of chemistry. Extra virgin olive oil, and only extra virgin, cold pressed, not refined, not blended, not labeled light or pure, contains a naturally occurring phenolic compound called oleocanthal. Oleocanthal was largely overlooked until a landmark 2005 study published in the journal Nature identified it as a compound that inhibits the same inflammatory enzymes, COX-1 and COX-2, that ibuprofen targets. The researchers described it as a natural anti-inflammatory agent with properties biologically similar to a low therapeutic dose of the drug. That was not a minor finding. It was a paradigm shift in how scientists began to think about why Mediterranean populations showed lower rates of chronic inflammatory conditions. For joints specifically, this matters enormously. The primary driver of osteoarthritis progression, the thinning of cartilage, the increase in joint stiffness, the erosion of the synovial cushioning that keeps movement smooth, is chronic low-grade inflammation. Inflammatory cytokines, essentially molecular messengers that signal tissue breakdown, accumulate in joint spaces over years and decades. What oleocanthal does is interrupt that signaling process at the enzymatic level. It is not masking pain the way a painkiller does. It is addressing one of the root biological mechanisms driving the deterioration. A large-scale analysis published in a leading European nutrition journal followed over 4,000 adults, aged 60 and above across Mediterranean coastal regions, and found that daily extra virgin olive oil consumption was among the strongest dietary predictors of lower systemic inflammatory markers, including markers specifically associated with joint cartilage degradation. The protective association was dose-dependent. More consistent daily use correlated with more pronounced reductions in inflammatory activity. Here is the critical detail most people miss. Oleocanthal is heat-sensitive and age-sensitive. It degrades significantly when olive oil is exposed to sustained high temperatures during cooking. And it degrades over time in storage, meaning an olive oil that was technically extra virgin when it left the producer may have very little active oleocanthal left by the time it sits on a supermarket shelf for 6 months, then on a kitchen counter for another 6 months after purchase. What to look for? A certified single-origin extra virgin olive oil with a harvest date on the label, not just a best buy date, but an actual harvest date within the past 18 months. Taste it before using it. Fresh, high oleocanthal EVOO produces a mild, peppery sensation at the back of the throat. That slight bite is oleocanthal. A bland, purely buttery or tasteless olive oil has lost most of its phenolic content. How much? The Mediterranean dietary pattern that researchers studied consistently involves 2 to 4 tablespoons of fresh, extra virgin olive oil daily, drizzled over salads, and used as a dipping base, poured over cooked vegetables after they come off the heat. That last habit is important. The traditional practice of adding a fresh drizzle of EVOO to food after plating, rather than only using it as a high-heat cooking fat, preserves the oleocanthal that heat would otherwise destroy. Use it for cooking as well, but add a separate finishing drizzle. That second application is where most of the joint benefit lives. Meet Eleanor. Eleanor is 72 years old, a retired schoolteacher from Phoenix, Arizona. She'd been managing bilateral knee discomfort for close to a decade. Stiff mornings, a grinding sensation on stairs, and a reluctance to plan walks longer than 20 minutes because of how her knees felt the following day. Her rheumatologist had classified it as moderate inflammatory joint disease. Her blood work showed consistently elevated inflammatory markers over several years. Eleanor's daughter had spent nearly a year living in southern Spain for work and came back with a habit she'd picked up from her Spanish neighbors, using a high-quality, harvest-dated extra virgin olive oil from a small Andalusian producer as her primary fat source, adding it fresh to every meal. She sent her mother 2 bottles and asked her to try it for 3 months. No other changes. 12 weeks later, Eleanor told us her morning stiffness had reduced noticeably. Her follow-up blood work showed a modest but measurable drop in one of her key inflammatory markers. "I still have the arthritis," she said. "I'm not going to pretend the oil fixed my knees. But I walked the entire botanical garden last month without thinking about them once. That hadn't happened in years." Eleanor's experience is something we hear echoed in comments and messages regularly. Sometimes, the simplest change delivers the clearest result. If you or someone close to you has dealt with persistent joint stiffness, especially in the knees or hips, and you've never really examined your olive oil label, share that in the comments. Eleanor's situation will feel familiar to a lot of people watching this. You're in good company. Food number 2, sardines. Number 2, sardines, the single most underrated food on the Mediterranean table. If you've ever thought about omega-3 fatty acids and joint health, the food that probably comes to mind is salmon. Salmon has become the poster fish for anti-inflammatory eating in Western nutrition culture. And salmon is genuinely good. But the research on what Mediterranean elders in the Blue Zone regions actually eat tells a more specific story. And it isn't salmon. It's sardines. Small, inexpensive, oily, unfashionable sardines. Consumed 3 to 4 times per week as a normal part of daily life, not as a health intervention. Here is why that distinction matters. Sardines are, by weight, one of the richest dietary sources of EPA and DHA, the 2 long-chain omega-3 fatty acids that the human body can directly use for anti-inflammatory activity. A standard 3.75-ounce can of sardines delivers approximately 1,500 to 2,000 milligrams of combined EPA and DHA in a single serving. That meets or exceeds the daily threshold used in most clinical research on omega-3 supplementation for inflammatory conditions. The mechanism through which EPA and DHA affect joint tissue is more sophisticated than simple inflammation suppression. These fatty acids are the precursors to a class of compounds called specialized pro-resolving mediators, SPMs. SPMs do something that most anti-inflammatory agents, including both medications and standard supplements, do not. They send an active biological signal that an inflammatory episode is resolved and that the body should stand down. Chronic joint conditions are partly characterized by the fact that this resolution signal never fully arrives. The inflammatory cycle continues in a low-grade, persistent loop. SPMs are the body's mechanism for breaking that loop. Without adequate EPA and DHA in the diet, the raw materials for that resolution signaling are limited. A clinical study involving adults aged 65 and above with confirmed inflammatory joint conditions found that participants consuming at least 2,000 milligrams of combined EPA and DHA daily over a 16-week period reported statistically significant reductions in joint tenderness scores and morning stiffness duration compared to a control group receiving standard care without dietary modification. The effect was most pronounced in the weight-bearing joints, hips and knees, where age-related inflammation tends to be most disruptive to daily function. Here is something that stops most people. Sardines contain more EPA, the specific omega-3 most directly linked to the joint's pro-resolution signaling pathway, per ounce than Atlantic salmon. Not roughly the same, measurably more. Be honest in the comments. Did you already know that? For yes or no. Most people who've been buying salmon specifically for joint health had no idea, and it genuinely changes how they approach their shopping list. There's one more reason sardines earn their place on this list that goes beyond omega-3 content. The soft, fully edible bones in canned sardines are a source of highly bioavailable calcium and vitamin D3, two nutrients that play distinct roles in joint tissue health beyond bone density alone. Vitamin D3 in particular has a regulatory function in the inflammatory environment around joint spaces. Research consistently shows that vitamin D3 deficiency is associated with accelerated inflammatory activity in joint tissue, and that repletion, through diet or supplementation, helps modulate that process. Sardines deliver both nutrients together in forms the body absorbs efficiently. The Mediterranean frequency model is the key point here. One serving of sardines per week produces a measurably different biological outcome than 3 to 4 servings. The adults in these longevity populations weren't eating fatty fish as an occasional treat. They were eating it as a staple, consistently, across decades. Cumulative omega-3 status, the level of EPA and DHA integrated into cell membranes throughout the body over years, is what appears to generate the joint environment researchers observe in these populations at 80 and 85. If sardines are genuinely new to your diet, the easiest entry point is sardines packed in extra virgin olive oil, which simultaneously doubles your oleocanthal intake from food number 3. Start with half a can over a simple salad with lemon juice and a small amount of red onion. Build toward 2 servings per week in the first month, and 3 to 4 servings by month 2. If sardines remain a hard no, mackerel and herring are the closest substitutes by EPA concentration and are significantly milder in flavor. Wild-caught salmon at a minimum of 4 ounces, 3 times per week, is an acceptable third option. Food number 1, pomegranate. Number 1. Pomegranate, the food that rewrote. What researchers thought they knew about cartilage aging. This is the one. This is the food that Mediterranean seniors eat with a regularity that initially struck researchers as a cultural curiosity, and that subsequent clinical investigation has elevated into one of the most actively studied areas of nutritional joint science in the past decade. Pomegranate. Whole seeds, the arils, eaten directly or pure, a cold-pressed pomegranate juice with nothing added. Not a blended juice drink, not pomegranate-flavored anything. The real fruit or its unaltered juice. And the reason it earns the number 1 position on this list isn't cultural reverence or general antioxidant properties. It's a specific, well-characterized biological mechanism that targets the exact enzymatic process most responsible for age-related cartilage breakdown. Pomegranate contains 2 categories of active compounds that are largely unique to it among commonly consumed fruits: punicolagens and L-argitanins. When the body metabolizes these compounds, primarily through gut bacteria, they produce metabolites called urolithins. This is where the joint connection becomes scientifically specific. Urolithins have been identified in research settings as inhibitors of a class of enzymes called matrix metalloproteinases, MMPs. MMPs are enzymes that break down the collagen scaffolding that gives joint cartilage its structure and cushioning capacity. In aging joints, MMP activity increases substantially, and cartilage thins progressively over years. This isn't the result of wear alone. It's an enzymatic process that continues even in people who are not physically overloading their joints. What the urolithins derived from pomegranate appear to do is interfere with that degradation at the cellular level, interrupting the enzymatic process before the structural damage occurs. A peer-reviewed clinical trial published in a prominent rheumatology journal followed 105 adults between the ages of 65 and 80 with confirmed knee osteoarthritis. Half the group consumed 8 ounces of pure pomegranate juice daily for 12 weeks. The other half received a matched placebo beverage. At the end of the trial, the pomegranate group showed measurable reductions in 2 key inflammatory biomarkers, interleukin-6 and C-reactive protein, alongside self-reported improvements in joint stiffness scores and walking tolerance. The control group showed no significant change across any measured outcome. The researchers noted that the results were consistent with the proposed mechanism of MMP inhibition and called for further long-term trials. A separate analysis of dietary data from adults over 70 in Mediterranean coastal communities found that regular pomegranate consumption, defined as at least 4 servings per week, was associated with significantly lower rates of self-reported joint mobility limitation compared to age-matched populations with minimal pomegranate intake. The researchers flagged it as one of the more statistically robust food-specific associations in the dataset. There is an important nuance here about bioavailability. The conversion of punicolagens to urolithins depends on the composition of the gut microbiome. Not everyone converts them at the same rate. Older adults with a healthy, diverse gut microbiome, supported by dietary fiber, fermented foods, and legumes, on all Mediterranean diet staples, tend to produce urolithins more efficiently and appear to experience more pronounced joint protective effects from pomegranate consumption. This is a meaningful reminder that the individual foods on this list don't operate in isolation. The broader dietary pattern creates the conditions that allow each food to work. How much? The clinical research has used between 8 ounces of pure juice and 1 full cup of pomegranate arils daily. 1 whole pomegranate yields roughly 1 cup of seeds. If using juice, the label should read 100% pomegranate juice, 1 ingredient. The majority of commercial pomegranate beverages are primarily apple or grape juice with pomegranate coloring and minimal actual pomegranate content. Check the ingredient list before buying. That brings us to Frank. Frank is 78, a retired electrician from Manchester, England. Frank was living with what his GP described as moderate bilateral hip osteoarthritis, persistent aching in both hips, with the left side flagged for a surgical consultation. Frank had no interest in surgery and was willing to try dietary changes in the 3 months before the follow-up appointment. His daughter had read about pomegranate and joint research and suggested he add 8 ounces of pure pomegranate juice to his morning routine for at least 10 weeks. "I thought she was having me on," Frank told us. "Pomegranate juice for my hips? I'd never bought a pomegranate in my life." He started it anyway. By week 6, Frank described a shift that he had trouble quantifying at first. The underlying ache was still present, but the intensity of flare-ups after active days had lessened. The recovery time shortened. By week 10, he was sleeping through the night consistently for the first time in over 2 years. His surgical consultation was deprioritized. "I still have arthritis," he said clearly. "The juice didn't cure anything. But the man I was at week 10 is not the man I was at week 1. I notice the difference every single morning." Frank's 10 weeks is a realistic time frame. Not a miracle, not overnight, but measurable and consistent. Here's a direct question for everyone watching. Of these 3 foods, extra virgin olive oil, sardines, and pomegranate, how many are you already eating regularly, meaning at least 3 times per week? Drop your number in the comments, 0, 1, 2, or 3. And if you're at 0 right now, that's perfectly fine. That's what this video is here for synthesis. There is one final layer to this that matters before the action steps. The reason these 3 foods work isn't only because each one carries individual potency. It's because they address 3 different stages of the same destructive process. The oleocanthal in fresh, extra virgin olive oil interrupts the inflammatory signaling that initiates joint tissue damage. The EPA and DHA from sardines supply the biological raw materials for the body's own resolution response, the system that's supposed to turn off chronic inflammation, but often can't in aging joints without sufficient substrate. And the urolithins derived from pomegranate inhibit the specific enzymes that break down cartilage collagen even after the inflammatory environment begins to improve. 3 mechanisms, 3 stages, addressed simultaneously and through daily food choices across decades. That is not a supplement stack. That is a dietary pattern. It's well established in the nutritional science community that no isolated compound has been able to replicate the joint protective outcomes associated with consistent Mediterranean dietary adherence, because the protection doesn't come from any single molecule. It comes from the cumulative, overlapping effect of multiple biological pathways being supported at once, every day, over a lifetime. Before the action steps, there's one question worth sitting with. What is the single change from today's video that you're going to make this week? One thing. Maybe it's finding a better olive oil. Maybe it's putting sardines on the grocery list for the first time. Maybe it's trying pomegranate juice at breakfast. Write your one thing in the comments right now. Committing to something in writing, even in a comment section, meaningfully increases the likelihood of follow-through. What's your one thing? Action steps. Here are 5 specific, implementable steps to start this week. Step 1. Audit the olive oil currently in the kitchen. Pull out the bottle and read the label. If it doesn't say extra virgin, or if it does but carries no harvest date, only an expiration date, replace it this week. Look for a single origin extra virgin olive oil from Italy, Spain, Greece, or California, with a harvest date within the past 18 months. This is the one item on the grocery list worth spending a few more dollars on. The difference in active oleocanthal content between a quality EVOO and a standard supermarket blend is not marginal. Step 2. Change how olive oil is used at home, not just what kind it is. Reserve a small amount of the quality EVOO for a post-cooking drizzle. After plating any warm dish, vegetables, legumes, fish, eggs, add a half to 1 tablespoon of fresh EVOO directly over the food before eating. This step takes 10 seconds and preserves the oleocanthal that cooking heat would otherwise degrade. Step 3. Add sardines twice this week. That is the starting target. Not every day, but twice. A can of sardines and extra virgin olive oil over a salad with lemon and a small amount of red onion is a complete, fast, inexpensive meal. After 2 weeks at twice weekly, build toward 3 to 4 servings. Give the omega-3 levels in cell membranes time to shift. The research suggests meaningful changes in inflammatory markers take 6 to 12 weeks of consistent intake to register. Step 4. Introduce pomegranate in a form that is actually sustainable. If eating the seeds directly is enjoyable, buy a whole pomegranate and eat approximately 1 cup of arils daily. If the preparation feels like too much effort consistently, find a certified 100% pomegranate juice, 1 ingredient on the label, and drink 8 ounces with breakfast each morning. Commit to a minimum of 8 weeks before evaluating whether anything has changed. Step 5. Start a simple morning stiffness log. Every morning for the next 12 weeks, before getting out of bed and moving around, rate the stiffness in the most affected joint on a scale of 1 to 10. Or write it down, in a notebook, a phone note, anywhere. 1 number per day. This baseline data makes change visible in a way that memory alone cannot. It also gives something concrete and specific to discuss at the next appointment with a physician or rheumatologist. The question to close on today is this. Before watching this video, which of these 3 foods was already a genuine daily habit, and which one feels like the most realistic first step this week? Share that in the comments, and if there's someone in the household, a friend, or a family member who has been dealing with stiff joints and has never heard the words oleocanthal or urolithins, share this video with them. This is the kind of information that rarely makes it into a 15-minute GP appointment. If today's video gave you something new, something worth acting on, subscribe to Senior Health Decoded. New videos every week, built entirely around the health research that matters most for adults over 60. Hit subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.